This third panel is titled Community and the Polity. Like the morning panels, we will begin with a pre-recorded interview video addressing the theme of this panel.
My name is Muhammad Imran. I'm one of the founding board members of Center for Interfaith Understanding. We call it CIFU actually. In short, I've come to a realization that the government cannot do everything. There are certain things that perhaps is best done at the civil society sphere. We have to build what I would call the muscles in our general population to be resilient enough to be able to withstand the challenges if our society is being dragged along different directions.
In CIFU, what's really prized is not just mere representation, it's also about genuine dialogue and engagement. So we have dialogues and seminars and really visits to places of worship, all of which really help to bring people together from different belief systems.
People share about their personal experiences, their lived reality, and that opens a window for others to actually develop empathy of trying to look at an issue through the lens of another person.
When people get to cultivate very robust and appreciative relationships with people of other religions and faiths, automatically there is a friendship, there is an understanding.
You find delightful friends, people, places where we go to kopi and makan and have chit-chat and talk and joke, and yet have some very, very serious and honest conversations about the divine, about how we feel about things.
So one of CIFU's earliest project was called Heart-to-Heart Conversation, where we bring in people from diverse backgrounds. With trained facilitators, we guided them in conversations over a range of issues. So racism is one, social inequality, gender and sexual orientation issues. People, I feel, are eager to discuss, but sometimes they need the right platform where they can feel it's safe enough for them to share their views. People who are part of CIFU, we do not make a claim to represent religion, because to us, people who are involved in interfaith represent themselves, coming from different faith backgrounds, including those with no religion.
It can serve as an inspiration for the bigger society to see that this kind of relationship that we have with strangers, with people whom society or the world might think would be antagonistic to one another, can actually bear fruitful engagement.
I'm Pri, I'm an educator, I'm also a mother and the founder of Don't Say Okay Kanmani. Don't Say Okay Kanmani is actually a play on a Tamil movie, Okay Kanmani. The idea was really to find something that's catchy. It was also a reminder to South Asian women to say, you don't have to say okay to everything. I wanted a space for myself and to meet the community and people who have gone through the same challenges and struggles as I have. And during COVID, I found the time to actually just start something. We started off with a lot of online sessions and online engagement.
When I found the page and I saw all these South Asian women sharing their stories, I knew that I wanted to be part of it. The themes and topics, it's very much shaped by the voices in our community. So kind of like a collection almost of stories of South Asian women in Singapore.
And now we have moved over to more physical events that the community has really organically kind of come together. We do community building initiatives where women just come together, they talk with one another through intentional bracelet making or art making, fireside chats on different topics.
Issues like mental health journeys, tackling social taboos. It's just a space for people to be authentic and to be comfortable and to just journey together with us.
We also do advocacy work, so a lot on social media, topics that impact the women. We actually ask the women what they want to talk about and we then organize it.
So I think when it comes to adulting, it's very difficult to connect with new people and especially people with relatable experiences in the brown community.
It's better when we meet people, we hear their stories, and we actually find out that a lot of things that we are going through, personally, individually, that everyone's going through the same thing.
I think that's quite heartening to know that people actually want to be a part of this community and talk about different things.
The challenge is to get people who do not believe in dialogue, as well as people who are skeptical of dialogue, to actually feel that, okay, they are willing to give it a try. The objective of dialogue is not to end with an agreement or end with a consensus.
How do you assimilate everyone, but at the same time, know how to respect and celebrate the differences, right? I think it's really just giving the minorities an opportunity to share their stories. There's a lot of power in the narratives that come from the minority groups or just smaller community groups.
Governments have to continuously engage with groups, no matter what their size is. We also have to learn that in a democratic space, there's a lot of give and take, that we cannot be expecting that our own views will triumph over everything else. But it's important to keep that conversation going.
With DSOK, it's not really just about confining it to the South Asian women community, but to see how we can expand it out. So how can the majority groups understand what it means to be a South Asian woman? That's something that I aspire to work towards, to see how we can create platforms where we talk about this in a larger landscape.
If you want a more cohesive society, you have to actually work towards greater inclusion. My vision for SIFU, to be a center where networks of individuals and groups feel comfortable, and where those who feel that they lack a voice feels that this is a place where they can be heard.
In this panel, speakers will explore strategies for building bridges between different groups, navigating potential conflicts arising from diverse identities, and cultivating a sense of national unity that respects and values individual differences. The chairperson of this panel is Mr. Lawrence Lian, chairman at Lian Foundation. He will open the panel discussion and introduce the speakers. May I now invite members of the panel on stage, please.
Good afternoon. It's not easy being the panel right after lunch, but I'm sure I've got incredible fellow panelists who will entertain you and give you great insights. This panel is, it says community and polity, but I was told actually it's about politics, but in Singapore we don't like the word politics, right? But actually, whether politics or polity is about how people live together in groups, how we make common decisions, plan decisions, big decisions, how we come together to make consensus, to make agreements. And so we're going to talk about this, but I think a lot of our speakers will talk a lot about the foundations to building consensus, building agreements, and so on. Whether it's social capital, or dealing with super diversity. And this topic is relevant because we are living in times where we are facing ill-defined and complex problems, even less certain solutions. And I think unlike newly independent Singapore, Singaporeans are much more diverse now, not just in race, language, and religion, but also in social ones, normative values, and concerns. So we are organizing ourselves around different identities, and we also want the political process to be more inclusive. And so we must seek somehow a way to have common ground and to build strong ties. Today we have got three panelists. On my immediate right is Associate Professor Daniel Goh. Please go and look at the conference kit because their full profile is there. So I will just take the highlight, as well as I'm going to share one thing that I've discovered that they've written about, which may not be so well known to the audience. So Daniel is Associate Professor at the Department of Sociology and Anthropology at NUS. He's also Associate Provost of Undergraduate Education at NUS and the Vice Dean of Special Programs at NUS College. I asked him what special programs mean. It's really bao ka liao. No, cannot fit in anything? He does. Okay. He was formerly the NCMP from 2016 to 2020, and he has written about regulating religion, migrant workers' exclusion in Singapore, and I'm very interested to know what has arrested multiculturalism. Okay, Daniel, please give him a round of applause. Kai Fong, Mr. Chung Kai Fong, a career civil servant. He's now the permanent secretary, information and development of it's a mouthful, Ministry of Digital Development and Information. Formerly at EDB, formerly PPS to the Prime Minister. He has written, tongue-in-cheek, about how to be a grumpy, self-serving public officer, right? Which is very interesting. You should go Google it, and why you shouldn't. Okay. Juliana Frederica is a founder of Lepak Conversations, an online group that discusses matters affecting the Malay Muslim community in Singapore. She's a multidisciplinary graphic designer with a wide range of experience in social media marketing and so on. But what she's passionate about is social change and believing that empathy is the start to this. And she has written about being influenced by her Christian aunt when she was young, while you and your mother are Muslim. So that's really interesting. So please, I didn't say please give applause to Kai Fong, sorry, and Juliana. And of course, Daniel. I'm going to get Daniel to go first, and so over to you.
Okay, so that's my title slide, holding on to multiculturalism and super diversity in Singapore. I'm just going to start off by saying that having an academic talking about ground realities is a major hazard. We can get too abstract, too ivory tower. So I'm just going to stake out my position here. While I speak as a scholar of race and multiculturalism in Singapore and Malaysia and the region, I'm also speaking, I think, as an academic who has been privileged to have a kind of front row seat in looking at ground realities. I'm volunteering at onepeople.sg, I'm a member of the management committee. I've been involved in various kind of activities, political and not, and it's from that kind of position that I'm speaking today. One of the key things about an academic having a front row in looking at ground realities is that the responsibility, I think, is on the academic to the scholar to translate terms that come into play, translate concepts that come into play in a sense that they could be imported. And I remember that 3.5 years ago, and it was also an IPS event together with RSIS, where I spoke about the question of Chinese privilege. And my point there was that, we cannot just translate a term like white privilege to Singapore and then just, identify the race and just plug it in, right? We have to think about historical realities. We have to think about our ground experience as we do that, as we translate. So my position was not to write off the question of privilege, but neither to kind of acknowledge, that privilege exists in the same way and the same fashion as other countries. We have to translate. So let me do this again today by talking about a term, super diversity, that has in some ways taken academia and scholarly works on race and multiculturalism across the world, especially in Europe, where the term has become an important point as a kind of argument that multiculturalism is dead in the water and that we have to deal with something different. So let me talk about this term, super diversity. It's making its inroads into Singapore. So as a kind of warning, as an academic, I'm just going to say that we need to translate this too to the realities on the ground in Singapore. All right, so these are the things that have been happening, right? Shifting multiculturalisms in Singapore. I'll just give you a long list of things there. I'm not going to go through them. I'm just going to read them off. If you're interested in it, we can have more conversations about this. Acting across national marriages are increasing. Immigration, of course, new citizens, permanent residents. There's also the internalization of work and culture, right? Singaporeans are going overseas, experiencing new cultures and bringing them back. Marketplace religions and spirituality is something that I study, and how people are jumping from one religion to another, from church to church, from temple to church, and church to temple again, and whatnot. Maturing identity politics, all right? So, especially with the repeal of 377A, we see that coming to the fore. More than mother tongue language policies, so having my children now interested in dialects and having the ability to kind of learn it in schools, I think that's interesting. And 4G, right? 4G society. has a kind of multimodal flexibility that's attached to it, in the sense that in sociology, what we study is when one generation hands over an entity, like a business entity or the state, all right, to the next generation, things start to change at the fourth generation. Revolutions start to happen, right? And hopefully we'll not get that in Singapore, but basically you will see that it's always a moment of change. With all this, multiculturalism as we know it, as I would discuss as the CMIO grid, Chinese, Malay, Indian, others, a grid, right, that is kind of imposed and used as a framing, right, for a lot of things, is now more like a dynamic word cloud that can kind of shift, right, with all the new terms that come about. So one experience of this, as you can see, is TAFEP. So with TAFEP, kind of not talking about multiculturalism in the workplace, but instead talking about diversity in the workplace. The word diversity is now more important as a concept and as kind of effective touch point. It brings out emotions, much more than multiculturalism does these days. And this is a factoid, right, that came from TAFEP's website, right? 78% of employees in Singapore experience some type of exclusion in their workplace. So inclusion becomes a lot more important. What is interesting here is that you see that DEI, right, which is a very common phrase used in Western MNCs as a kind of policy, the E is dropped, right? Equity is dropped. Now we can have a lot of discussions about this, but I'm not going to go into that. But basically what we have in Singapore is that there is a kind of translation that's involved, right, in which we are not talking about individual equity, but we're talking about diversity and inclusion, and we are, just kind of bracketing equity out for the moment, right, as we talk about another term, which is harmony, all right, in the workplace, all right? Now, so what is super diversity? Now, the phrase came about with a social scientist, Steve Fotovac, in 2007, who wrote about the changing multiculturalism in the UK, where there's a kind of dynamic kind of interplay of variables among an increasing kind of number of new and small and scattered multiple origin, transnationally connected, socioeconomically differentiated and legally stratified immigrants. So you can't recognize racial and ethnic groups, right, as concrete or cohesive groups anymore. It's in flux, right? It's starting to kind of become very diverse, right, to the point where you can say it is super diverse. Today, Singapore, in 2015, has published an article, right, that talks about super diversity. Right, so this is, I think, the first appearance of the term in a kind of public domain in the media, in which the definition is diversification of diversity. Right, so and in terms of the local academic context, geographer Brenda Yeo, my former dean, has talked about the complex migrant spaces that have appeared in Singapore, in which there are new entanglements of old and new immigrations. Right, so the term is kind of coming in to Singapore. So how can we define super diversity for Singapore? Well, this is the way I kind of think about it, right? It's in terms of newness and oldness, all right? So it's an emerging kind of super new cultural identities and practices that's linked to new migrants of economic globalization. And sometimes Singaporeans are also new migrants, right? Because they move in and out of Singapore to different places to work. Mixing with and within not so new or old ethnic nationalization, right? The CMIO grid, which is our multiracialism, right, of all colonial racial classifications and ideology, which is usually separated into just white and natives, right? So this is my own kind of a complex way to talk about the old kind of layering, right, a layering of all the way up to the new and the super new, okay? But what is interesting about super diversity is that the kind of identity categories that we have, Chinese, Malay, Indian, others, or for me, Teochew, Chinese, Catholic, right, has become a lot more fluid, a lot more flexible, a lot more formative in the sense that they are formative of new form of identities. They're fungible even, right? So we can begin to exchange stories that relate to each other. And sometimes it's fickle. We change according to circumstances, according to environments, according to the speeches and the situations that we meet and the conversations that we have, all right? So that's one way to think about it. Now, these are some examples of how super diversity has kind of been seeping in conceptually into Singapore. This is a Center for Livable Cities publication. I think it was in 2020 or 2021, right? Living with Diversity the Singapore Way. It's a bit small to read, but I think if the slides are online, you can take a look at it. Or actually, you can access this document. Just type in living with diversity with the Singapore Way, and it's a very interesting way of kind of translating super diversity in the Singapore context. And one of the things that you can kind of see in the pictures, there's a layering. Right, it's a layering onto the CMIO grid together with the kind of the pictures or the images that are familiar for you, right? To us in terms of Chinese, Malay, Indian, and the kind of religions and cultural practices that we are associated with. This is another way coming from the arts. Super Diversity and Cultural Practices in Post-Pandemic Singapore, a more recent publication. And you can read, this is one of the last pages of a very readable, very brief article, so please read it, right, how super diversity is kind of represented, right? So hailing from China, Chinese may speak a combination, it's about language, it's also about ethnic identity, it's about cultural practices, and so on and so forth, and it's about talking about how basically diversity is diversifying within the CMIO grid and across the CMIO grid, right? Okay, so the point that I think I want to make here is that in any efforts to kind of translate super diversity, and you'll find that I'm not just the one responsible or doing the translation of super diversity into kind of local parlance. I think increasingly so, we'll find more and more people talking about it, and we'll find that people will be trying to kind of define it in their own terms. So what do we need to be conscious of as we talk about super diversity? How can we operationalize it with the ground realities that we face? I think first of all, one of the things that we need to do, and in Singapore at least, is that we need to go beyond the politics of representation and recognition. This is something that happens a lot, especially, I would say, just because I'm working in the NUS and the kind of academic context. It happens a lot in Western universities, where the politics of representation and recognition is always there. So every group, right, forms itself into an interest group within the kind of super diverse context, and one to be represented, to have their voice represented and to be recognized by, of course, the university administration and also the student kind of union body and so on and so forth, right? So I think we need to go beyond the politics of representation and recognition. It's not just that. We have to think about other issues that are involved, right? In Singapore, we should try our best not to use the CMIO grid as a main frame. Understand it is something that we have to layer upon a legacy frame, but it's not the main frame. It's not the only way and the main way that we have to interpret realities. Allow for pluralities, for multiplicities, intersections. Each word means different things. Pluralities means, well, many, right? Multiplicities means that you have many being represented in one person or one group, right? It's not just many groups. Intersections is when you see the different groups intersecting with each other, overlapping with each other, so that we can find common ground, right? Operationally, in terms of methods that we can do, is sometimes if we go around searching for super diversity, how do we look for it? Don't look for it in, let's say, things that people do, or skin color, and so on and so forth. But I think one of the interesting things that what we can do is to observe and question how groups do inclusion and exclusion. And we can begin to see how super diversity emerges in these very actions and behavior in inclusion and exclusion. And normatively, what shall we do then when we talk about super diversity? Well, let's choose inclusion as an operational principle. Right? If we cannot include, why and why not? Right? And if we have to exclude, what can we do, right, to make sure that it will not create negative consequences and whatnot? So the operational term here is inclusion. All right, let me just deal with certain tactics, I think, for doing super diversity, because I think ultimately, when we translate the term on the ground, we need to start doing it, right? And then what do we do then? One thing that I think that has come up, I think, over the last 10 years, especially after SG50, is that our country seems to be talking non-stop, right? Our nation seems to be talking non-stop. We are always telling stories. And I think that's great. But what it also means is that there's more space for more people to come on board to give the stories, right? And you, Lena, will talk about, Lepak conversations and how, her group is basically opening up that space for more talk. But how we talk is also important, right? How we dialogue. And we need to have respect for each other's narratives and to bring our life histories to bear, right? And life histories do not just belong to the state, to National Heritage Board or, the museums and whatnot, but it's personal. It belongs to us, right? And we need to bring that out, right, more. Another tactic, I think something that President Taman has brought out in a very pointed and very direct way, and it's great. Very simple, right? Listen, understand, accept, right? Find for common ground. But if you can't find a common ground, never mind, it's okay. We still have to hold on to multiculturalism. And I find that inspiring because it is, in a sense, the bottom line. No matter what, right, given the super diversity, if we cannot find a common ground, it's all right. We still hold on to multiculturalism because it's a Singapore way, right? And I think there's a lot more to explore what we can do to hold on to multiculturalism. And I think what he said in just November last year at the Harmony Works conference is something that's really important, and we have to think about it. So this is my last slide, all right? Strategies for super diverse Singapore. What kind of strategies can we adopt, all right, to approach super diversity? This is more for maybe policy level or maybe for civil society in their interaction with the state to understand like what can we do, right, with this. At the academic level, super diversity is meant to be descriptive and not normative. But what can we do as a kind of strategy to dealing with the objective ground condition of super diversity? I think the first thing is to rethink the culture as not one of belonging. It's not about us belonging to a Chinese community or me being a part of a Teochew heritage or a Catholic church or so on and so forth. But we are thinking of cultures of becoming, right? What are we becoming? Who are we? And where are we heading to? It's more important than talking about cultures of belonging. The second thing is effective citizenship. What can we do in terms of defining ourselves as citizens of Singapore? I hate the term true blue Singaporean who is born and bred here. I hate it because although that also describes me, it doesn't describe a lot of my friends who I find who are fellow Singaporeans or who have become Singaporeans. And I don't want that to exclude them, right? So hate, I use the word hate very strongly. And I'm trying to point to the fact that citizenship has a lot to do with emotions. I think we have to start thinking about citizenship as made up of a cluster of emotions, and how then do we think about and how to talk about these emotions. And the last, not least, is to always treat inclusion, right, not as an endpoint that we have achieved something, but as a kind of work of progress and a work in progress. Right, so I'm just going to end on that note, and I'm just going to leave my fellow panelists and, of course, the audience to raise questions and to probe on that. Thank you.
Okay. Thank you, Daniel. Thank you, Daniel.
Yeah,
I mean, a lot of nuggets for thought, CMIO as a dynamic word cloud, diversification of diversity, hold on to multiculturalism. But I'll come back to you, because you say, well, if you can't find common ground, hold on to multiculturalism, but in politics, you have to find the common ground. So how do we do that if it's so difficult? On to Kai Fong.
Hi, everyone.
Okay.
Daniel started out by saying that, the worst thing you can get is an academic talking about ground realities. But actually, there's a worse thing, getting a civil servant in the ivory tower talking about ground realities. But here I am. Okay. I'm going to touch on a topic that's tangential, that's adjacent to what Daniel was talking about. I think what he spoke about in terms of hyperdiversity is part of this. But much has been said in this conference about social capital. Right? Janadas, I think when he opened, brought us back to COVID and attributed our success in COVID and fighting COVID to social capital, the whole social cohesion, how people listened to the government, trusted the government, and how people looked out for each other. So I want to spend some time unpacking it because I think it is essential to all of us understanding this term and trying to figure out what's best in terms of governance. So, what exactly is social capital? Many economists, scholars have actually used this term, but if you put it very simply at its core, is that social networks have value. So if you think about it in economic terms, right, we talk about physical capital. It's like a screwdriver. I buy a screwdriver, now I'm much more efficient in fixing bicycles, so I earn more money. That's physical capital. I'm investing in physical capital. Civil servants like myself love this term, investing in human capital. Why? Because it's really about training, skills upgrading, skills future, right? I invest money, I go to school, I upgrade my skills, I become much more productive. So let's move on to social capital. What does that mean? It's actually a similar concept. It's about actually us assigning value to social networks. That means all things being equal, our education, our investment in equipment, our access to tools. If I live in a community where I have productive social networks, I know the people around me, I am much more productive. And there are many studies that show that, right? In different areas. If you look at crime, for example, actually the best predictor of crime in neighborhoods is actually whether you know your neighbor's first name, whether the people around the street know your neighbor's first name. So why does social capital work? What's the basis of it? I think the reason it works is because, if you cheat somebody, other people will hear about it in the neighborhood. Right? So the more I cheat, the more I'm going to lose because no one's going to do business with me. And in a sense, that is what you call specific, this term, I'm going to stop using jargon, but specific reciprocity, right? I'll be nice to you if you're nice to me. But I think what's even more powerful in this concept of social capital is a generalized reciprocity. Right? I'm going to be nice to you and to help you because in this community, others are nice to me. I can trust that next door, the doctor down the street, the next door technician, they're all going to help me out when I need a light bulb, need to change the light bulb. It means I can trust you can trust me, we are both trustworthy. And anyway, at the weekend, we're going to see each other at the community run or at the market. And this is what I dare say happened during COVID. And this is what I hope happens in our neighborhoods. But my argument here is that social capital matters to us and our social connections matter. One more concept before we jump in. Janadas talked about bridging social capital versus bonding social capital. To define it, bonding social capital is my ties to people that are just like me, my demographic, my workplace, maybe. And bridging capital is my ties to other people who are not like me. Race, gender, interests, likes, and whatsoever. Naturally, bonding capital is what we are comfortable with, and that's great, right? Because we all want to hang out with people just like us, we feel comfortable. But actually, what Daniel was just mentioning, in a hyper-diverse society like ours, actually what we need is more bridging social capital. And in a sense, having a hyper-diverse society is a great thing, because that's where the opportunity is. So that's what I'm going to talk about today, right? How do you use bonds? How do you use all the weak bonds, right, to bridge? How do you turn bridges into bond? How do you bridge? So it's not so binary as to say bonding great or bonding bad, bridging good. But we have an opportunity to bridge, to build bridging social capital. Okay, so now that we have this definition of social capital, I'm going to try to illustrate my point using three images or three concepts. And in honor of President Trump, who's taking over, I'm going to use the weave to start the discussion. And so I'm going to weave in and out in terms of images, talk about my own personal experience, and maybe refer to some studies. Okay, and the images I'm going to use is the choir, the village, and the gym. The choir, the village, and the gym. Village can be replaced by neighborhood, park connector, and all that, and then the gym. Okay? Let's first talk about the choir. Actually, the term social capital was popularized by Robert Putnam, who wrote a seminal article called Bowling Alone. If you haven't heard about it, just Google it. But essentially, his thesis is this. He observed that when he was growing up in the 50s and 60s, actually there were many bowling leagues, and America was together. There's a lot of social cohesion, membership in clubs were high. But ever since the 70s, 80s, and 90s, there was declining social capital. He noticed that while people were still bowling, they were increasingly bowling alone. And the bowling operators were the ones that noticed this first. Because the ones that were bowling in bowling leagues, they were ordering drinks and food, and that's where they made all their money. But when you are bowling alone, you order much less food. And Robert's argument was that social capital in America was declining. But actually, what's more fascinating about Robert's work is actually his first work in Italy. He wrote in this book, Making Democracy Work, where he studied Italy and the different regions. Because in the 1970s, Italy decentralized power from the center in Rome to regional governments. And he wanted to understand which areas thrived and why. Because if you think about it, the DNA is the same. They're all Italians. But actually, the soils in which the cities were growing were different, right? Some of them were politically aligned one direction. Some of them had different stages of economic development and inequality. Some of them had different education profiles. So he wanted to know which did well, which didn't do well. And his measure was, at the end of the day, how did governance play out, right? Which government stayed there for more than 5 years? which ones not only said they will build 1,000 daycare centers, but actually built them, and whether citizens were satisfied with regional governments. I thought that was a very good study, and it really sounds like what our government would evaluate ourselves on. And what did Robert find? He went through factor after factor. First factor, education. Did it work? Actually, not really, because some of the highest performers had the same education levels as the lowest performers. Was it urbanization? Nope. Was it religion? Nope. Was it political ideology? Nope. Was it wealth? Maybe you start off richer in technology. Maybe there was some correlation. But actually, if you look within the wealthiest group, it didn't really tell the full story. So near the end of the project, he actually chased down one more lead. And he was at Lake Como with his wife. And he entered a chapel, and in it was a choir of local people singing Vespers in the late afternoon in the middle of summer. How strange, right? And through that insight, he measured the number of clubs, memberships, the network of social and civic engagements, not just in politics, but how people were connected to each other. And when they graphed the correlation, it was a straight line. And his conclusion that what makes governance succeed is actually the presence of civic life in Italian villages. And the answer actually is social capital, and that's the foundation of bowling alone. So, if you think about it, and he goes on further, so you may think, maybe inequality, we've got to deal with it first, then we have better governance. But actually, what's amazing about his finding is that he concludes that social capital is a leading indicator and not a lagging indicator. Right? So after controlling for everything, you realize social capital leads first. So there's something about choirs. There's something about choirs, there's something about clubs in our neighborhoods. So that's the first point, the choir. If you ask ourselves, right, Janadas talked about how our social capital was all-time high during COVID, but how there are some fragmentation and some pressures going on. In fact, if you look at US today, Robert's latest book on the upswing talks about how America's in decline on many factors, right? They're much more polarized in politics. In fact, Republicans no longer want to marry Democrats, right? Which is unthinkable if you look at the 60s. Much more unequal. Social capital is at an all-time low. I don't think we are there in Singapore yet, but I think we have to ask ourselves the same question. Are we on that same path? Some of IPS studies actually show that we are, right? Whether we are much more lonely, we stick to ourselves. Maybe we are watching Friends rather than having friends, right? We are eating, I checked with my Grab, people who work at Grab. Grab food orders have increased, takeaways have increased. Maybe people are eating alone much more. And maybe anecdotally, are we joining choirs? Are we joining football clubs? Do we actually have local platforms in which we are engaged in? So that's the choir. My second image is that of a village or a neighborhood. And here I talk about a village. I'm borrowing a concept from Derek Thompson's latest article in The Atlantic versus that of a family and that of a tribe. If you think, one of the areas I cover is telecommunications, internet. And in some senses, during COVID, our bonds have become stronger, right? As a parent, I'm spending way more time with my children. In fact, I text my wife, who's away, but I text my wife 10, 15 times a day. Even when we are in the next room, we text each other, right? My daughter takes a train, I get a notification. In fact, the nuclear family is getting stronger, isn't it? I see my best friends here and there. But at the same time, messaging apps, TikTok, Reddit, they all plug us to our tribe, right? The people who share our interests. I'm a Liverpool football fan. This is the best season that we have, right? My daughter just finished her O-levels, and where does she go to find out about schools? Not just to open houses, but to a Reddit thread called SG Exams, right? Where there's a constant stream of comments. There's actually very supporting comments. In fact, if you look through, very interesting. Some people struggle with needing help and loneliness. You can find it all there. But the interesting thing is this, right? With the internet, with all these home-based conveniences, it has solidified both our closest and our most distant connection. But there's something actually in the middle that's missing. And this is what this sociologist professor talked about in terms of the middle, which is the village. These are familiar but not intimate relationships with the people that live around us, our neighbours. And his thesis is that while families teach us to love, tribes teach us loyalty, it is the village, it is the neighbourhood that teaches us tolerance. Right? And if you come to think of it, that's quite true, right? Because only in your neighbourhood you have people of different stripes, different ages, different genders, different political stripes. If you disagree with each other in a local community, if you are actually congregated physically in the same place, you will hold your tongue. Whereas when I'm on the Reddit forum, anything goes, right? So why? Because like it or not, you're going to see each other, you're going to bump into each other. I reflect this about myself, right? And I have a really nice park connector where I stay in Joo Chiat. My MP is Edwin Tong, so you can ask him about that later. But I find myself somewhat, I don't know whether I'm engaged or not, right? But I seem to know, my dog and I seem to know every dog's name down in my neighborhood. But actually, I come to realize I don't really know the names of the dog owners in my neighborhood. But I see them almost every day. And imagine what we can do as a civic, as a neighborhood thing, if we got to know each other's names. And we engage in small talk first. Small talk is not bad. In fact, small talk is the basis for big talk in the future. I experienced this during our Singapore conversation as well. Actually, very unusually, Singapore conversation was when we brought different people of different stripes, the old and young together, and they had a conversation. We actually listened. We have this actually in Friend Zone too, the village. Friend Zone is an initiative. It started out from Reach, but we worked with an organization. And it got young people in the neighborhoods to come together to talk. And that's really, really important because it is within the neighborhood. They are doing things together. It's not all successful because I don't think we've followed up in terms of what they can do together, but it's a starting point. And I'm looking forward to Juliana when she talks about Lepak and what they're planning to do. So, this is really the neighborhood. And ask Minister Edwin Tong about Halloween. Because quite unprecedentedly, I was surprised at how spontaneous the neighborhood has become during Halloween at Joo Chiat. We had 4,500 people there. I was forced by my son to decorate my house. I spent hundreds of dollars on sweets because what PA gave wasn't enough. But it was amazing how, at least I would say a third, if not half of the houses opened up their doors, did trick-or-treating, including members, like you would never think of, right? Malay families were there, opening houses, which you think about it, this is what multiculturalism is all about. Celebrating a pagan festival. I don't understand why, but it works in Singapore. But this is really about neighborhoods, and are we paying enough attention to the village? Finally, the gym. So right now I'm middle-aged, I'm reading my midlife crisis. And one of the things which I'm resolved to do is to go to the gym more often and be fit. In fact, during COVID, I've been taking gym classes online, but it's really not the most motivating. And in fact, after COVID, I tried to go to a gym. I signed up for all these mega gyms, but I could never sustain myself. There was always motivation. But actually, last year, when I turned 45, I finally found a gym that worked. And it's a neighborhood gym. Why? Actually, because when I show up, they are familiar faces. In fact, I'm not so friendly a guy. Right? It took me 6 months to actually talk to people at the gym, or to at least know what are their names. But what's interesting is this neighborhood gym has built a community. And I think the owners intentionally designed it this way. They celebrate birthdays, they celebrate Christmas with a gift exchange. They know every single person's name. When you walk in, the gym instructor greets you. And it's got to the point where I'm quite familiar with the people. They are not my friends. I don't call them up. I have maybe their numbers, but I really don't call them up. But one day I needed help picking up my daughter, and someone just helped me. Another time, someone came up to me because they realized I'm a civil servant, and they asked me for career advice. And it's become a village. It's become a third space, right? And the owners actually intentionally designed it this way. And they're celebrating their 10th anniversary soon. And if you know me, I can't imagine myself thinking that, maybe I'll show up for the 10th anniversary. That's how intentionally designed they have been for their gym. And why does it work? I like to think that it works because I think all of us want to feel a certain social connection and belonging. And I think we are all, I think Ernst's stats show it, right? Everyone is getting lonelier, less number of close friends. But this is the third space, the gym, where I feel I can be seen. But this requires deliberate and intentional design. Okay, so now, choir, village, or the park connector, and gym, okay? How do we build this social capital in this deliberate fashion? I have no solutions, but I can give you maybe 3 ideas or 3 concepts, and I'd love to bounce it off you. First, I think we got to rethink our measurements. And our measurements, because as a Singaporean, KPIs work best for us, right? Give us any KPI, right? We will figure out the best way to do it. And I suggest that maybe in terms of our KPIs, apart from economic efficiency, apart from simple things, right? How do you achieve scale? And every time you go to a government meeting, people like myself will say, how do you achieve scale? How do you make use of best resources? But actually, sometimes having scale may not be the best thing, isn't it? For example, I think we lost something when we consolidated a lot of our our kopitiams into large food courts and food centers. Why? Because kopitiams were the gatherings.
Sorry, Kai Fong.
Yeah, I'm sorry. I'm deliberately going past time. Okay? So what is a great KPI? When I visited some of the family service centers, one set of KPIs struck me. Number 1, how many of your volunteers are from the neighborhood? And number 2, how many of those they have helped end up being volunteers? And I wonder what sort of KPIs we need to measure. Number 2, I think we need to focus on the physical. Here, let's use the internet and call alloys, right? Alloys, right? Meaning that we have to use the internet to enhance the physical, not the other way around. Let's focus on neighborhoods, civic engagements. Small talks matter, small things matter, right? Whether you are part of a club, that matters. And lastly, we have so many platforms out there. It's not just the government platforms. We have PA. I'm very cheered when I see BTO flats up and BTO WhatsApp groups emerging, because people are not just excited about moving into BTOs, but they're excited about meeting each other. And we need to be much more deliberate about these. We need to be much more deliberate about building third space. Finally, I would just say this, right? The PM signaled just as much about his focus on building social capital. You might have missed it, but essentially that is what Forward Singapore is about. But we are honestly only at the beginning. I just went to the roadshow, and there are roadshows every weekend. Last roadshow was at Ang Mo Kio. But the roadshow, if you look at it, many of it is about benefits to Singaporeans in different stages of life, which is great. But actually, that's not what Forward Singapore is about, right? Forward Singapore is about all of us working together collectively, participating, helping each other out. So I liken Forward Singapore to a little bit like the slogan in China, right? 中国梦, China Dream. It's a slogan, but it needs to be worked out. And that's why I guess you have Minister Evan speaking later, because he probably holds the most important portfolio. In the US, Robert Putnam wrote Bowling Alone. Within 1 week, Bill Clinton called him up to his house, to White House to talk. But what happened after that? Did America turn around? Absolutely not. It went down and down and down. Why? Maybe 9/11 happened, internet happened, but maybe they didn't take it so seriously. So here, I think we need to take it seriously. What Janata said about the different fractures in society is something that we have to take seriously. And if we really believe Robert Putnam, we have to make a determined effort to build social capital. And that brings me to my final point, which is that it starts with all of us. So my challenge to you is this, especially at the start of the new year. Are you joining a neighborhood gym or a neighborhood club? Are you getting to know the people in your neighborhood? And you'll be quite surprised. I think people open up much more and they're willing to talk to strangers more if you first make the move. So the key to governance, better governance, is actually not asking the government to do more. But it starts with you joining a club, getting involved, and maybe joining Juliana in lepak conversations. Thank you.
Thank you, Kai Fong. Thank you. And very clear on bridging and bonding social capital. I will come back to talk about linking social capital, which is the third arm of social capital, but also maybe how big talk can also spark the small talk that we talk about, right? You know, and how's the small talk linked to the big talk. But before that, Juliana, can you respond to our two speakers?
Thank you.
Please.
I was telling my friends earlier, no pressure on me, just the youngest panelist going last on the last panel, while all of you are, having food coma from lunch. But I'll try my best, and I have the privilege of also sitting through, all 3 panels, and I've taken on the task to try to connect all of those, and I think focus on what I think is especially important, which is taking action. So if they're the ones sitting in the ivory towers, then I'm the one on the ground fighting fires. So that's my experience. And I just firstly wanted to acknowledge all the students and youths here. I think I'm very encouraged by the active participation. Just out of curiosity, I wonder if there are any ITE or Poly students here. If you are one, can you raise your hand? Oh, I see some. Okay, I see 2 over there, 1 over there. Okay, I'm happy to see that. So the reason why I ask this is because I think that's part of the work that I do with Lepak Conversations. I think it's really about questioning who's not in the room and who needs to be there. And I think that's really, to me, the core of what inclusion and diversity is. So I have slides, if they can pull it up, but I'm probably going to skip most of it and get to the essence, which. I think it's actually this question, which is, should Singaporeans organize around values instead of identities? And I want you to just keep that at the back of your mind. And I'll talk more about my experience running Lepak Conversations, so I'll just share that slide. So I am a Gen Z founder of Lepak Conversations, and we actually started as an Instagram page, putting out educational content on Malay-Muslim issues. And there was a real vacuum and need for youths in wanting to talk about social issues. And I always say that, the youths are on social media. Why not bring the conversation to social media? And so that's what we do. And over the years, we realized that youths want to go offline. That's why groups like Friend Zone exist, as Kai Fong mentioned earlier. Youths have been spending a lot of time online, and they're tired of it and they want to go offline. So we have been doing a lot more community events. We've also expanded to collaborate with organizations and even government. So I think early on in panel 1, there was some discussion about Yale and US and how are we developing critical thinking in youths. It's good that there is some form of structure in schools, but again, I was not a university student, so I felt like I missed out on that, right? So Lepak Conversations' core mission is to make conversations about social issues accessible, right? So that's why we're on social media, that's why we do casual, fun Lepak community events. So I think the conversation on social media came up here and there, and how it's a new platform, and how do we control the conversations that go on there, because there are no proper legislation. So what we do on Lepak Conversations is we actually act as a moderator, and there are terms and conditions on our page actually. So we tell our followers that you have to be respectful when you're discussing certain issues. And it's very interesting, if you go to our page, you go into the comments, you will see complete strangers just discussing about social issues, learning from one another. So that's how we create an inclusive and safe space online for youths to take part in conversations about social issues. And the reason why we tap on conversations is, I think earlier, Mr. Lian shared, my personal philosophy is empathy is the start of social change, and I think it links to my question earlier of values as opposed to identities. And when you, it's easier, I think, in my perspective, to unite on values, and I have a few examples of that. For us at Lepak Conversations, allyship is a core value, and that means that although we primarily advocate for the Malay-Muslim community, everyone is welcome, and we are very intentional in saying it. If you're non-Malay Muslim, you are also welcome here. And we emphasize that it's important for them to be here because they help to amplify minority voices, and they can advocate for us in spaces where we are not in. So I have a very recent example, actually. I was moderating a panel on Malay-Muslim benefit organizations just last Saturday. And I saw a few familiar faces from the Lepak Conversations community, and they're non-Malay Muslims. And again, I was surprised. This is about Malay legacy groups. This does not involve you at all. I'm very surprised to see you here. And before I even got to the person to ask them, why are you here? He's already speaking to the pioneer founders of MMBOs, in short, who are elders and they don't have enough resources. And this young man, who's not Malay Muslim, said, "Oh, how can I help you with raising funds? I have 5 or 6 friends from my network. We can come down and support you." And I think that's why it's important to create that space to welcome everyone, because that exchange of wisdom and knowledge, even if you don't belong to our community, that is very valuable. And keeping to ourselves within communities, I think, just limits that kind of exchange of knowledge. Yeah, so I think, again, what we do, again, panel 1, I'm just remembering there was some talk about building trust between people to people, and I think that's really what Lepak Conversations does. We try to bring people together. Some other ways that we try to be intentional in our language is, for example, we had an event on Malay men's mental health, right? So we were intentional in saying this event is for men, but if you're a sister, you're a wife, and you're concerned about your loved ones, you are more than welcome to come as an ally of men. And again, it's a quarter of the participants were female, and they shared stories of how, yes, I am a mother of a son, and I want to come and learn how I can support his mental health. So yeah, it's really about, again, creating these 2 values are very important to us. All are welcome, and centering the invisible, the excluded, the forgotten, who is not in the room that we're not immediately thinking about, but that should be included. So the reason why I keep saying we need to be intentional with it is because I don't think we can take for granted that Singaporeans know how to be inclusive just because we're multiracial, multi-religious. They do need some support. Another example I will give is from this photo in the center here. It's the live Gaza monologues that we organized. And we were very intentional in saying that this event is for those who are unsure, don't know where to start, are on the fence. Yeah, just come, we welcome you. And we were also very intentional, again, in the program design. The panelists we invited, diverse again. So we had an actress who's non-Malay Muslim, we had a religious teacher, and we also had a government representative, which was Mr. Janadas. So again, this intentional designing of spaces to welcome people and not create echo chambers. And the other thing I think I wanted to talk about about Gaza monologues is what, again, in panel 1, I think there was that conversation about people to people, but also how do we bridge the state and people. And I think Gaza monologues was a very good example of the government being open to collaborating with a community group like ours. So I think that's what's needed more of for the state to be comfortable and trusting of the community. And I think more importantly, being willing to take risks, willing to fail, willing to make mistakes. So I describe the work I do as working with minorities, but I also say minorities of minorities. And I'll bring up the example of Malay men mental health, right? So there's that layer of gender, and then there's that layer of race, which was immediately apparent to us. And so I actually told my team directly, let's not talk about religion because there's religious trauma. Usually in the Malay community, if you have mental health issues, it's because you don't pray enough, you're not religious enough. But it turns out, when we had our first event, that everyone was asking, what is the religious perspective about this? So we actually had to pivot our strategy and be like, okay, we actually have to talk about religion now. So I think as an organization, I think we have assumptions or hypotheses about what might work best, but then when you go on the ground, it turns out to be different, and that's where you need to leave room to pivot and adjust and ensure that the goals and objectives are actually aligned to what the community needs. Let me see. I am running out of time, but I think one last thing that I want to leave you with is perhaps developing critical thinking in youths. Encourage again to see the youths here, and I think what's needed is scaffolding so that more youths can start organizations like Lepak Conversations or can be empowered to take charge and take action in their own ways, starting from as young as secondary school. So yes, I think I'll just leave the time for Q&A because that's where it becomes exciting. Thank you.
Thank you, Juliana. And thanks for exemplifying what you are telling the audience about taking risks, tackling difficult issues, experimenting. Sometimes it doesn't work, but you adapt. So thank you, Juliana. Okay, we go to Q&A. You can send your questions by Pigeonhole. But online, you've done this already for 2 sessions. You know what to do, and you can also come up to the mics. And there are 6 in the room. But maybe I can shoot the first question, using my prerogative as the moderator. And going back to what I mentioned just now, maybe we accept the need to listen, to understand one another, to build the bridging social capital. But politics is about finding consensus and co-designing real solutions, talking about the big issues that count. And so how does this roll up, and how does the work that the tactics, strategies that you have prescribed roll up to that, the co-creation of solutions for the future of Singapore? Any of you can start, and then I'll...
How does this roll up?
Sounds like a policy question.
Okay, that is me, is it? Okay. How does it roll up? Well, I think everyone has a part to play, including government. And government's grappling with this, trying to figure out what areas in which we should engage more and actually involve citizens in the process. I think, and it has to go beyond just community gardens or libraries, right? Maybe just to put it out there, take a little bit of a risk. One of the issues that I had to deal with personally in my capacity, was rating movies, censorship. And one tricky issue that we had to deal with at the height of the 377A debate was how to rate Lightyear, the movie. If you know what Lightyear, the movie is, you have kids, you would know. It's a Disney movie, second installment after Buzz Light. I don't know how many installments are. But the tricky part of it is, in the midst of amending the 377A legislation, which all of you, I think we had discussed in the previous IPS conferences, we had to rate Lightyear, and there was a scene in Lightyear where the protagonist, which was Buzz Lightyear's best friend, had a flashback and realized that she is homosexual, right? And we have this rule in our content guidelines to say films should not promote or normalize behavior. And so we had a conundrum. How should we rate it? Of course, that's subject to interpretation. One of my jobs was then to engage. And I engaged with my minister, different groups. And we engaged 2 kinds of groups, right? We engaged, of course, people who are active in the LGBT community, advocates. And actually, very reasonable. We had a very good discussion. But their point was art needs to follow society. No, sorry, art needs to lead society, shows what's possible. And if the values are good, right, in terms of, we're still promoting family and all that in arts, why not let people choose? I'm not asking you to do it free for all, but put it at PG-13. Let parents decide whether they want to expose their children to, right? And they made an impassioned plea on that. Then I met religious leaders, right? And again, they have been very engaged in the 377A debate, but they said, look, isn't this a slippery slope? Isn't this clearly promoting or normalizing behavior? In fact, you should make it M18. So as a dutiful civil servant, and after we discussed all things, we decided we will cut it right down the middle, cut the baby right down in the middle. and we did NC16. And I think that was the right choice. Both sides weren't happy, but NC16 was the guideline in which we had to check ICs and IDs at the cinema. If you are PG-13, you don't need to. And I think both sides could live with it. I don't know, but are the two ever going to come together and decide that, oh, we all agree that this is NC16? Actually, frankly, I'm not sure, you know. Here is where government maybe, I'm not saying this, we have found the right path, right? Perhaps, apart from engaging the two, maybe we should have brought them together. And maybe in retrospect, maybe that's something we need to do a lot more of, bring everyone together, and hopefully they can come to a consensus. But actually, it will not be easy, because these are two polarized issues, and I don't think they'll ever meet. But I think the way to sort of bring them together, to come to a form of compromise, is if we have more social capital. That means there are other bridging factors in which the two groups got to know each other, rather than them living in their own circles with no connections. If I have this at the neighborhood level, if I have this at different, maybe we will be able to make it work.
Okay.
Yeah.
So that's one, split it down the middle, one solution. Anything to add? You were in politics, Daniel, so don't run away from it.
Maybe I won't go back to politics, but let me talk about the experience I have at NUS. So I think Yale NUS was mentioned. So I'm at NUS College without the Yale, right? And in more recent years, I mean, we've been thinking about critical thinking, I think, in a more grounded fashion, in the sense that we don't want to take a text, we don't want to take a theory, and then we deconstruct it, and then we, apply our critical kind of thinking kind of lens and take apart all the arguments and so on and so forth. The idea of critical thinking is really for it to kind of infuse into the world, and we've been experimenting with new ways of education and experiential learning, where we bring students into the world, get them involved. And it's interesting because a lot of our university students come from background in which they have actually very limited experience of the world because of social media, because of all the, all the isolation kind of pods that we are living in. Getting them involved, and so I get my students involved in teams of interdisciplinary teams. So some from computer science, some from business schools, some from arts and social science, engineering, coming together. Half of them sent out to Southeast Asia and experience super diversity, right, in its face, right, and then deal with actual problems on the ground. And when you see actual problems on the ground, you're going to see a lot of conflict and contestations. People who don't agree with each other. You can't find common ground. And sometimes you just can't find common ground. If you can't find common ground, what then do you do, right? Well, focus on the problem, try to solve problems, try to bring the communities up together to try to ask difficult questions, and then experiment and be showing that let's try this out, let's try that out, right? If you can't succeed, then let's try to get together and try different things out. I think the trying is important, and we are always thinking of solutions in Singapore. We are not thinking of trying as much, and we are kind of risk averse, right? So we don't try. We want to, okay, let's try in a secure environment, do in a lab, right? And then we bring out the solution and roll it out in this scale, and so on and so forth. But why don't we get communities to try, have more spaces to try things, right? And then fail. And with that failure actually can become a common ground. So maybe that is the way. That means the fundamental thing I'm trying to say, I guess, is to start doing things instead of ruminating and looking for solutions in abstract.
Okay. Yeah. Anything quick to add?
Yeah, if I can just
to manage time, we've got people wanting to ask questions. I've got great questions trending very highly. So let's all try to do our part by keeping our answers short so that we can get more.
Yeah, I just want to link to, I think, the Prof. Teo Yu Yan's point earlier on including people from marginalized communities, and when it comes to this kind of civic engagement between the state and these communities, there is this level of, can I trust you? What will you do with this information that I'm giving to you? How can I know that the state is accountable and will take my considerations seriously? And I think just expanding broadly, it's really about earlier what I said about values versus identities. Now we're talking about polarization. You're talking about someone from the LGBT group and then someone from the religious group right? You're labeling it based on identities, but what if we can come to a common consensus based on values of we all want to love, we all want, we all just want to see ourselves represented in movies, for example. And I have a very clear example of rental flat residents, and Lepak Conversations actually went to the ground and managed to interview master's students who are living in rental flat residents. And I think when other Singaporeans saw that master's students are living in rental flat, that debunked the stereotype that rental flat residents are all, uneducated. So it's really about knowing one another and also going down to the very human level and looking at our common values.
Okay, great. I'm going to go quick to this one. The lady here, just introduce yourself and stick to one question.
Hello, my name is Amelie. I'm a student from UWC. And my question is, on social media, people often self-select themselves into echo chambers, which reinforces their belief and values. What role should the state play, if any, in reducing the negative effects of digital fragmentation?
Okay. Digital.
Again?
Kai Fong, back to you.
Indeed, it's a concern. I think that's why we have certain rules. We have certain laws in place in Singapore. For example, we have POFMA, which all of you will be familiar with, which counters misinformation, disinformation. We have POHA, which counters harassment. We have, rules surrounding racial, religious, insensitive talk. But I think it is not enough. And I don't have a solution, but I can tell you that things are just going to get worse. Right? If you look at what's happening in the US, Facebook has just said it's going to be much looser on content moderation. I think we are going to eventually see different platforms espouse different values, and the algorithms themselves would reinforce people who subscribe to those values. And like it or not, Singapore, in a sense, we are an open society, so we are all influenced by this. But all is not lost. I think there's a couple of things going for us. As Janadas said in his earlier speech, right, his opening speech, right, one of the reasons why we did so well in COVID was actually because we used the internet and we used such forums. But because it was alloyed with other forms, right, not just social media, was alloyed with news, government WhatsApp channels. And I think in Singapore, we have the unique social context of, firstly, I think we trust the government, we generally trust the mainstream media, even though news consumption is coming down. And most critically, we have physical connections. We live in a compact place. And therefore, you don't just get one source of information if you're isolated. You get many different sources of information. So my role in running the government information and communications arm is to make sure that we reach out to as many people as possible, including niches, the so-called the forgotten people, and using all means possible, whether it's on the ground. Those of you who live in HDB, you see TVs, right, at your lift landings, right? Those actually gives us the best ROI in terms of message recall, right? And we are trying all means, and this is what we need to do to combat an information landscape. And finally, I think what we need to do is to be able to articulate and have this shared social consensus on what we stand for, what our values are.
Okay. Anything else? If not, I'll go quickly to a question online. 21 votes. So this is the top one. With regards to Kai Fong, you're sharing on social capital, but this is for everyone to come in. To shorten the question, short of policies, how can communities step up and in to build bonding and bridging social capital? And if we include schools, if we consider schools as part of the community, how can we bring them in, particularly when there's quite a bit of inequities among schools?
I have a very clear example which I mentioned earlier about the legacy groups, right? Malay Muslim mutual benefit organizations. So these are centuries-old organizations that are dying out because the youths are not taking part in it. And so I thought, okay, I need to be proactive. I joined the MMBO in my neighborhood, and I think I found a sense of community that I didn't expect, all these makcik. So what we do is we do rewang, which is we come together, we prepare the food, we chop onions, and I found a lot of joy in that. I felt like I belonged to my community. So what I would say is that when it comes to certain identities, and especially ethnic or religious, there are already certain legacies of communities, and it's really just to preserve this, go back to this, because there is a lot of wisdom in continuing these traditions. I think that's my take.
Daniel?
Well, I think the interaction between schools and their immediate neighborhoods are really important. So I think in that sense, having the schools go out into that community and interact with the neighborhood will, in some ways, moderate the inequalities and so on and so forth. I think that's also an important point for the government to take note, right, which is how you locate a school. Because at some point, I think at some juncture, somehow a lot of the schools, really good schools, were concentrated in certain areas. And if you can spread these good schools out and very much create that kind of space of inclusion where you have all these schools spread out around Singapore in mixed neighborhoods. I mean, HDB and URA have been doing a good job of trying to mix the different types of housing together so that there's no exclusion and no ghettos being formed. Schools, I think, need also to, the location of schools need to be done in that fashion. And the schools themselves have then to have to take a kind of a very active role in reaching out to the neighborhood. My son is in Catholic High, a good school, I guess, in Bishan, has been spent his last Saturday doing a lot of newspaper collection for a charity. And that exercise itself, although at my level, I think, it's not enough. You need to go deeper. You need to go and cook food for homeless folks and migrant workers. I'm trying to get him to Little India to do that. But that's the start, right? For the entire school to be doing that, and I think for the boys to take pride in engaging the neighborhood, that itself, I think, is an achievement, and we should do more of that.
I think three things. One is really this is what Juliana and people are doing. Actually just do, right? And I'm really cheered that so many ground-up engagements are happening. And it doesn't need to be all serious, like Lepak is, right? It can be, for example, on my Instagram feed, there's a social running club. People just gather and run. There's a social hiking club. The other thing that popped up was sing-song social club, right? People gather together. You don't need to be of great singing ability. You just sing a song together. I think the more that we see such happening, the better. Then the challenge is for us to measure, are these happening at a bigger rate or a slower rate? That's one. Secondly, from the government or things within our control, perhaps one angle to look at is how do we make sure the platforms that we have community first? Because the prevailing thinking sometimes is you attract, then you connect. Attract people to your... But actually, maybe you need to flip it around. That's what Daniel said about the schools, right? You connect, then that's how you attract, right? So how do I organize my platforms, whether it's your schools, and how do I measure that, right? So in schools, I'll be looking not just... I know parent volunteers now are actually quite active, but it's only a small subset. What I want to actually measure is how many people are actually volunteering. Right? Same thing in your grassroots. I'm told that actually the same people show up for grassroots over and over again. But actually, how do we connect to the people who are not showing up? And maybe you need other means, other ways of attracting. Then you find a way to actually get them much more involved. I think that's a reflection for me in terms of what government can do. And finally, back to my final point, which is that all of us have a part to play in being much more active in our neighborhoods, in even a simple act of getting to know your neighbors better actually increases your well-being.
Great. We are fast running out of time, so I'm going to get a couple of questions at one time so that you can answer whichever one you want. So 1, 2, and 3, and then we'll go back to the top trending question online. So one here.
Hello, I'm Sean from NUS Student Union. So my question is relating to what Prof. Goh already shared with regards to how we're trying to better build social solidarity, this sense of social capital and building and bridging social capital, right? I want to ask, what about the role of young people? So Prof. Goh shared about how schools, institutions have gone out. And with regards to what Miss Juliana said, I want to ask, what are the types of scaffolding specifically that we as young people, students, can tap on? Thank you.
Okay, the question there.
Thank you. Thank you. My name is Jeff Koo. I'm a historian. I work for MFA. I wanted to ask an old-fashioned question in a super diverse Singapore. What is the role of national history in building common ground, in building social capital, in facilitating inclusive conversations and finding common values? How should we think of national history? What is the role of the state? What is the role of our various communities in approaching this? Thank you.
One there.
Hello, I'm Chow Pei Ling and I'm representing Nanhua High School. So the panelist did mention that he would like to see deliberate, intentional action from people to make Singapore more inclusive, as well as Ms. Juliana saying that she would like to see youth. So my question is, what would be your ideal outlook on youth being involved in the community? Thank you.
Okay, there are two questions on youth. Scaffolding for youth in the community. You can pick any question to answer. There's one on national history. You can answer all. Youth.
As the representative youth here, I'll try to answer this question.
Means that the three of us are old
yes,
men
still
and
youth.
young
Yes,
women.
still youth. Okay, so the first question on what can youths do? The first thing you can do is to join existing ground-up initiatives. There are a lot. You can just go on social media. I'm sure there's a cause that you can join. And honestly, it can start as simply as raising funds among your friends for a cause that you care about. I think I've been seeing a lot of youth start mutual aid for causes that they care for. And what types of scaffolding can youth tap on? I mean, obviously, I think NYC has been doing a very good job in creating, in reaching out to the youth and offering funding and so on. But I think for me, what was valuable was actually seeking out mentors in the sense that there are more seasoned activists from the past who have a lot of wisdom, and even and their approach might be different from ours. We might not have used, they don't use social media and so on, but they have a lot of wisdom in how do you get funding, or like who do I work with, how do I start, right? Because as a youth, this information are not readily available, but there are people with that kind of wisdom. And I guess connecting to the question on what's the ideal outlook of youth being connected and contributing, I think that the answer for me is in the name of Lepak Conversations. Like it starts from talking to your friends, right? Having those conversations among yourselves. And I would say that that's actually how I got started. I was apolitical, I would say that, because, for personal reasons. But because Instagram was accessible to me, and I just started seeing a lot of news online, and then I just posted on Instagram stories and I left my opinions. And then that became a platform for me and my friends to chat about social issues. And so when I started Lepak Conversations, they didn't see it as jarring as, hey, why is Juliana suddenly starting this? Why is she suddenly an activist? It's because it's already normal that I'm talking about social issues on social media. So I think it's really just normalizing these conversations, and from the conversations that I've had, it's grown to us, partnering with the government, partnering with other organizations to facilitate these discussions, and we're also moving forward to developing programs, doing training, and so on. So my short answer is start by talking about it with your friends. Yeah.
Well, I've got a response for the youth issue, and my response is don't forget the old folks. You guys are going to be the energy, you're going to have the new ideas, you're going to have pushing the frontiers and everything, but let's bring the old folks along. I think I'm aging, right? So I've become a creature of habit, and sometimes I get grumpy, and sometimes I just want to be left alone, right? And multiculturalism is also about tolerance, right? Just leave me alone to do my thing, right? As long as I don't disturb others, don't disturb me. But sometimes I also want to not feel lonely and to be involved. And I don't have the energy, my networks are not as good as the young people who are always energetic. Bring me along. I just want one short example. NUS College, a group of students have this impact project where they want to collect old toys, set up a toy library for poorer folks, those in rental housing and so on and so forth. The problem of scale becomes an issue, right? I'm going to collect this whole lorry load of toys. What am I going to do to clean up, sort them out, and distribute and maintain a library? So how? Where's the manpower? They can't get their fellow students who also have other projects. So immediately they thought, hey, how about those people who like to hang out in void decks, old folks? who have nothing to do, right? Get them involved in this project. And they're starting to get them involved, and you can see the excitement, right, of the old folks getting involved in doing something, right, for the community and for the neighborhood. So bring them along. So that's my plea, I guess.
Can I jump in on the youth? And then I know you want me to answer the history question, unfortunately. Yes. Okay. Maybe I'll just say this. I agree with Daniel, but old people are very good at telling you that something is wrong. I mean, that's what Jonathan did, right, in his first speech, right? Middle-aged people like me are very good at telling you that leave us alone, right? Our lives are tough enough as it is. But young people, I think you are the one to work out, you have the energy, you're the one to work out messages, you're the one to work out policies. I mentioned Robert Putnam, right, about how social capital is declining, even to today, it's getting much worse. But he actually wrote another book called The Upswing. And in it, he analyzes what happened to America leading up to the 1960s. He starts from the early 19th century. And back then, in the early 19th century, it looks remarkably similar in many measures to what is happening in America now. But surprisingly, in the 1920s and as it moves towards the 1960s, there was an upswing. America in the 60s was more equal as a society than Sweden. In terms of memberships, bowling leagues, it went up. And why? There are many, many reasons why, but part of the reason is driven by the young people, by the progressives. And by progressives, I don't just mean people who belong to a particular party, but people who got together. I think they caught on to this cultural wave, and they activated each other, and they joined groups, they moved, they had a social movement, and they went on. And I like to think that that's the role that young people can play in Forward Singapore. Okay, next, on history. I think government does have a role to play, and that's why, whether it's SG50, bicentennial, there will be places in which the Founders Memorial, there will be places in which we are trying to catch our history and actually tell it and get people to understand this is our shared beginnings. I mean, if you've gone to the bicentennial exhibition, it was really good. Why? Because it not only talked about how the British came, started with Sang Nila Utama and then Raffles and all that, but they actually then connected it to what sort of values do we hold today in terms of Singapore. But I think there's also a place, what Daniel talked about, this project in NUS, there's also a place for our individual histories. And I think that's what connects each other individually. My father's history may not be important to you, but it's important to me. And actually, I find that in my darkest moments, or at a time when I feel, things are really tough, hearing other people's stories is the best solution for me, not hearing other people's advice. And the more stories I hear of people, the more connected I feel that there's a larger purpose behind me.
Okay, great. I've got to apologize to the two young persons in front here, because we can't take your question. You can approach the speakers after the event, after the session, and talk to them, because I want to raise this last question, because it's trended so high, about the relevance of ethnic-based associations. I mean, ethnic-based associations, right? Your CDA, CSINDA, Mendaki, if CMIO, it's become less relevant as a label, and with hyper-diversity, I guess. Want to address this?
You want me to try first? And what you think?
No,
yeah,
go ahead.
I encourage it. I don't think they are irrelevant at all, because these are, in a sense, bonding social capital, right? You want to actually mix with people with shared interests, shared concerns, and this provides a safe space for it. I think the danger we have to guard against is exclusiveness, right? Daniel talked about inclusion as intended design, right, or as intention in design. And so for all these communities, the real test is, are you going to be exclusive and all your activities are around just building this bonding capital? Or are you using this bonding capital as a start, but you're investing in bridging social capital? Right? The IROs is a classic case of that. How do you have IRO if you don't first join a religion and then after that participate in the IRO? So that's the kind of interlocking, weaving networks that we need to deliberately build in Singapore. We should not have any organization that is exclusive. Right? The Ku Klux Klan has great bonding social capital. but it does absolutely nothing for bridging social capital. Let us not go there.
Well, I'll just add that they are also evolving a lot, right? Since 1980s, when Mendaki was formed, and 1990s, and when CDAC and SINDA was formed, they are evolving a lot, and they've been exploring new ways to keep themselves relevant and to go into new areas to organize the communities. And I use the word in plural, communities, right? Different communities. Sometimes engaging also migrant communities that kind of fit into the category somewhat, right? So they're also being flexible, also being fungible, being fickle, and that's part of evolution. So I think there is a space for that. So as I said, super diversity is not replacing diversity, it's not replacing multiculturalism. It's layering, right, on top of what we already have. So don't go down the route of a lot of Western polities in Europe and also the US and Canada, where multiculturalism is declared as dead, and people junk it away. Hold on to it, and let's rethink it and keep evolving. I think that's a key point.
I think for me, 2 points. And coming from the Malay community, I do think that there are a lot of socio-economic structural issues that self-help groups like Mendaki are still needed for. They have that legacy of connecting the state and the people, and I think that kind of support is still necessary because a lot of these structural issues are historical and it has taken a long time to solve. And Mendaki and other self-help groups should continue to evolve with the company and try to see how we can address these issues. And the second thing, which is something I usually ask ministers, right? I think when we talk about the relevance of ethnic-based associations related to policies, and I think my most recent curiosity is about climate change, and the solution at a national level seems to be a blanket one, or it seems to be focused on corporations, right? And making sure that corporations are greener, they do CSR and so on. But I think for me, coming from the Malay community where cultural values are still very important, I'm asking, how are you reaching these ethnic groups? Are you using culture-specific solutions? Because Malay people in the past, they lived in kampongs and they were self-sufficient, they grew their own crops and so on, and they were very sustainable. They were champions of sustainability from the start. It's just that they moved into urban living and they don't know how to continue those practices, or they can't, right? They're not allowed to forage, which they used to in the past. So I think it's perhaps understanding if at a policy level, a national level, is there enough importance placed on ethnic-based associations? Because that sets the tone for citizens, right? If it's going to be a blanket solution, everyone care about the climate, right? And they're not telling me, as a Malay person, your forefathers used to eat with banana leaves that would just disintegrate, and that's natural. You as a citizen, you don't have that knowledge, and you don't see the relevance of ethnic-based associations. So I think it goes both ways at a national level as well as at an individual level.
Okay, thank you. Sorry, we really very quickly ran out of time. I mean, you think that a 1.5 hour session, it might drag, but it was anything but that. And I take away, one main thought, which is the solution lies with everyone of us in here, right? To take responsibility, to take that uncomfortable step.
Join the club.
To join the club, join the choir, but go outside your comfort zone to create and to encounter and to just do, and experiment. So let's give our panelists a round of applause for taking the risk to be on stage. Thank you.